Hi, hello, Nicholas. Thanks a lot for
Hel-
joining.
No, thank you. How are you?
I am good. How have you been?
I'm very well. I'm very well. Thank you very much.
All right. Let me begin by introducing this interview for the viewers today. So, welcome everyone. Thanks a lot first for Nicholas for joining us from Copenhagen. Uh, he is a part of the team at Emergency Architecture and Human Rights. The team is also based in Copenhagen. This interview is a part of the series which has been conducted since the year 2020 at World Architecture Community. I am Varun Kumar. I am the Deputy Chief Editor at World Architecture Community. And the interview was intended to keep the discussions with regards to design and architecture going on across the pandemic lockdowns also. This is also with the hope that we would continue to inspire the design community the world over. And today, the interest in inviting a person from emergency architecture and human rights was to encourage a discussion on how architecture and its related fields can contribute to the welfare of the society at the larger context. So, before we begin with Nicholas, I would like to quickly introduce his profile and the profile at EAHR also. EAHR, or Emergency Architecture and Human Rights, is a non-profit organization founded in 2015. The team works towards strengthening resilience in vulnerable communities suffering from inequality and humanitarian crisis. Our activities span, or rather, EAHR's activities span from the development of community platforms for citizen involvement, innovative and resource efficient building methods, to teaching architecture and the interactions of social and the built environment. So EAHR is committed to contributing towards the achievement of the sustainable development goals. And the focus of the work is on providing spaces that enable education for everyone while aiming to create sustainable cities and communities. And Nicolás Palacios is originally from Chile and he's currently residing in Copenhagen. Nicholas is passionate about urban phenomena, particularly about the transformative and complex dimensions of public space, advocating for an interdisciplinary approach to urban dimensions. Nicholas also has a master's in human geography from Lund University and an undergrad in political science and urban studies. He has taken part in several international research projects and has held positions in private sector and consultancy in different academic as well as non-academic environments. Currently working in emergency architecture and human rights, Nicholas has engaged in different projects through the last year, learning from the challenges that came with the ongoing pandemic. So let's move on with the questions, Nicholas, if you are ready.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Varun.
Pleasure to have you on board with us, Nicholas.
The same.
So to begin with, would you like to describe your work as an urban researcher, and what was the nature of work that you were involved in? Could you elaborate
Of course,
about that?
of course. So I have been working on different research projects since 2013, mostly in the Latin American context. It has been related to political science, urban sociology, and human geography. I have been mostly related to the academic sector for these years, but a couple of years ago, I started also working on consultancy and urban matters related to gender in the city, for example, and also in the relevance of connecting different areas of knowledge when we address urban studies or when we address the city as well. That's kind of the general overview.
Right. So, do you feel that architecture and development in contemporary times have been functioning without considering the bigger picture, where societal affairs and human welfare are a significant part?
Well, I believe that architecture, to make it like more specific, it's it's a tool, a very powerful tool, and it's a tool that can make incredible things. It has a lot of transformative power, but also tools can be used to reproduce or perpetuate hegemonic positions. The urban thinker Henri Lefebvre called it as well. It can be a tool and a mask. And I think that sometimes we have to also be critical about the practices that we take. So I believe that architecture has, for example, modernism had a very strong message behind, but also it works as a cautionary tale to tell us what happens when we don't listen to the grassroots or to the people that are actually inhabiting the cities. So I think it's a double-edged sword in a sense.
Okay. So what would be your suggestions for encouraging the architecture community at large to engage more with projects for social welfare?
Well, I will encourage architectural practices to approach other sectors of knowledge. I think that especially in the social sciences, I come from there as well. So I think that there is a rich and long-standing tradition in social sciences in addressing community issues, in addressing the base, and also trying to find out which issues are behind the things that we see. So I think that architecture planning in general can really learn and can really cooperate with other areas of knowledge. And I think that it's a critical aspect, even if it's in a private practice. When you're designing a building, it's really important to understand the surroundings where you're doing it. So I think it's something to take advantage of in nowadays architectural practice.
Okay. So, when we speak of the overlapping areas that architecture and other social sciences have, how do you feel that architecture, urbanism, and these different subjects in social sciences overlap?
Well, I believe that architecture, economy, politics, or any other profession or approach responds to wider context. So I think that architecture deals with the mundane, with the everyday life of people, and the built environment we rely day to day. So it is inherently, in its core, it is a social practice. So I think that through history, urbanism brought into architectural practice a more integrated view. And nowadays, also with the constant influx of new social science researchers that are getting into architecture or urban planning, it's becoming maybe a stronger, more conscious, and more complete practice as well. So I think that there is a lot of overlapping in these different areas.
So as we saw earlier, emergency architecture and human rights, EAHR, they've been actively involved in social projects. So could you discuss a little bit about how the team members at EAHR joined together to kickstart the initiative?
Yes, of course. This is old history, so I wasn't part of it, but I'm aware of it. Okay. So it started as a multidisciplinary group that were coming from different countries. They met in Copenhagen, in Denmark initially, and they started discussing and noticing that they had a strong belief that the built environment and therefore architecture plays a key role when it comes to communities, and it plays a key role when it comes to human rights. The built environment has effects on people's lives. So early on, emergency architecture got their first grant. And with this first grant, this first funding, the Emergency Architecture and Human Rights counseled Danish municipalities in local development, integration, and placement of refugees. So the focus was activation of empty buildings and urban spaces in Danish depopulated areas. So that was kind of the beginning, the kickstart of the organization in that sense.
Okay. Just to interject, the team at EAHR, what are the various backgrounds involved in it? Are all the members of the team, apart from you, architects, or are they from different backgrounds?
There are different backgrounds. There is political science. We collaborate as well with anthropologists, with sociologists. We work also with people that related to business development. So it's it's a really mixed bunch. And of course, there's people that are in architecture, but they also work in design, also in risk management. So there's a very interesting dialogue constantly on how we develop the projects.
Okay. So it was interesting for us to note emergency architecture in the name of your team. So could you describe what the concept is when you say emergency architecture?
Of course. So emergency architecture in human rights operates in accordance to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we try to articulate our projects in a way that every project that we do relates to at least one article of the Declaration of Human Rights, or engages directly in a perspective that we produce no harm to the people and their rights when we're developing a project. So it's about creating these spaces that have a correspondence with the Declaration of Human Rights, but also contributing towards like the local development without creating harm to any of these rights either. So we try to be also very careful when we're developing a project in that sense. And nowadays, we're also guiding our projects with the sustainable development goals. So we try to engage with them, particularly with education and sustainable cities and human settlements.
Okay. Now, to discuss a little bit about the project typologies that EAHR is involved in, what are the target areas in the general society that EAHR seeks to engage with for the various projects?
Of course. So we as a non-profit organization, we have a very wide range of clients, to put it in a way. We, in many cases, collaborate with bigger humanitarian agencies, so we can work on the design or also in the implementation of projects. But we also always work very closely and directly with local communities. So we always have a partner in the local area that knows and has like very strong roots in the sector. So the idea is when we come with a project, that responds to not just to the built environment, but also to the cultural aspects of every region or area where we are developing the project. So it can be very varied with the people that we work with, but also we try to keep this as our guideline, work with local community and work with people that know where we're working with.
Okay. We were also able to understand that EAHR provides membership for people who are interested in similar areas of work. So could you please describe what the objectives of having a membership facility in your practice?
Of course. So we as a non-profit organization, we are always looking for this for members to join our global network. We try to look for people who are passionate or people who share the same beliefs. We usually get a lot of emails at our contact of people that want to do something or contribute in some way to the work that we do. So in that sense, we created this membership scheme. So with the membership, people contribute to the organizational growth, development, and expansion of our operations. And also they can get actively involved in our work, for example, going to workshops and so. So we also engage with the corporate members or bigger organizations that want to do in a more concrete way contribution towards communities or the built environment. So in some cases, we also get to work together with the bigger organizations or companies that want to actually give something back to the areas where they have operations as well.
Okay. Speaking a little bit about the projects at EAHR, we were able to understand that your team has been involved in projects in places like Nepal and Jordan, and the kind of projects where schools for children of refugee camps and also children who are disabled. Could you perhaps share the intentions and objectives behind these projects in your portfolio of work?
Of course. So as I said before, we have a strong focus on working with education, but also a very strong focus on working with youth. So we believe that also creating the conditions in the built environment for the youth to feel safe, to feel at place when we have something is very relevant. So the interventions we have been working, as you mentioned, they have been schools, schools or also classrooms in refugee camps, but also have engaged with playgrounds. And because we believe that there is a very important role to generate these spaces. We think that if we can ensure them to have a space that is actually dedicated to their needs, they can have a better development. They can become more active members of their communities. And also, we have to think that these spaces can have multiple uses as well. So they are kind of open to different things. We are really happy to see that some of our projects are not just used by the target group. For example, if it's a community center, we also see that kids are going in there, or there are groups of women that go there to do some of their activities. So it's really good to see that when you develop a project, it actually serves more than one group. And that's also something that we're aiming to do in that sense.
Okay. What would you say is the significance of working for human rights specifically in today's world?
Yeah, I think it's central. I mean, the history of people, it has been about a struggle, fighting for their rights. I mean, not just in the 1900s or in the 2000s, but it's always about not just surviving, but trying to create the best conditions for them to live. So we believe that in this struggle, the built environment plays a key role in enabling the spaces for human rights to be consolidated. And in this way, we approach our commitment to the Declaration of Human Rights and to communities as well. We think that democracy does not rely just on the elections, but also on people showing their discontent or their support. So also in that sense, a space and public space plays a very key role. So we think that our contribution from architecture, from urban planning, relates to creating these spaces and giving the people the place for them to actually fight for these rights as well. That's why many of our projects also happen in other places, not just in Denmark, because we believe that it's really, really important to address this issue as well on a global scale when we're addressing human rights. I mean, it cannot be something of just one country. It's a global effort of solidarity in a general context. Yes.
Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier in the session today, the pandemic has caused the foreclosure of a lot of the work around the world, even with architecture practice. So, I would like to ask how, according to the team at EAHR, has the pandemic impacted architecture projects and initiatives for human rights? So what were your learnings or the team's learnings about this impact?
Yeah, well, the pandemic has meant for many worldwide a lot of stress, loss for many people. It's been a remarkably tough year for most of us, and as an organization and as people, we also have dealt with a lot of issues associated to it. The important part has been that we have been able to not just stay afloat, but also develop projects. Of course, always keeping the necessary spaces and addressing things in new ways. We learned the value of having an interdisciplinary team that allows us to have different perspectives on the same problem and come up with different solutions. But in a more major scale, the pandemic has shown us that inequality in the cities, inequality in rural areas has been ravaging, not just now, but it's from a historical perspective as well. The pandemic is only like highlighting these issues and bringing them up to people that never actually thought about them before. And in that sense, the role of human rights keeps being central when we talk about providing health to everyone, a roof for everyone in this sense, and also in the new threats that appear for human rights when there have been some authoritarian practices in some countries related to that, people that cannot demonstrate, or people that cannot, even though if they follow the necessary Corona proofs things. There are some countries that have been like completely locked politically as well. There are many indicators saying that democracy is also a threat in some countries. So I think it's very relevant to stay vigilant and to keep an eye out that the restrictions in that sense do not stay after some places. So we have to always be really evaluating the health of our democracy and the health of our public spaces and the health of our cities as well.
Right. So, Nicolás, just to interject once more, I would also like to ask, as the team at EAHR, when you approach, different sites in different countries for projects, what challenges do you face with regards to execution of your projects? What nature of collaboration do you have with authorities? Do you work with bodies at the local areas and organizations? Could you just share a few words about that?
Of course. So, as I said before, we try to work with the local partners or people that have very strong grassroots in the area. So this means sometimes collaborating with nonprofit organizations, or with NGOs, with local NGOs, or with local community groups that have like reached out to us saying, we want to do a project about this. So what do you think? That also means collaborating and understanding local regulation when it comes to construction, when it comes to zoning and planning. So there's a lot of other complexities. And as we are not based there, we rely very heavily on the local partners. So it's a process of learning together and co-creating together. It's not about coming there and putting a project like out of the blue. It's about having a very strong dialogue with the local authorities, local community groups, local neighborhoods. It's about engaging and taking their inputs and actually making those inputs part of the project as well. So we rely very heavily on a participatory approach. And we try to respect the needs and the perspectives from the local communities. And that for that is fundamental to have strong partnerships, not just where we're working, but also with the implementation organization, or when we are designing something, we need to be in a constant dialogue, which is fundamental.
Right. So in the future for your upcoming work, in which different places and countries would you wish to work?
So we're currently focusing very strongly on education, as I said before. So we're developing a project called Classrooms for All, where we are also aiming to work in areas where there are different risks and vulnerabilities. In that sense, so we are trying to create an approach to address different and multiple risks and vulnerabilities as well. So in that sense, if the needs arise, for example, somewhere in the Middle East, we have experience working in those areas. We have had amazing experience knowing wonderful partners. So in that sense, that's always a place where we can apply, if there is like local interest in it, our projects. But currently, due to the pandemic, we have also been working very heavily on a more local context in Denmark. We have learned a lot from working in a very local context. We have engaged with the vulnerable housing areas as well, creating temporary interventions in the built environment, mostly also focused on education and youth. So we have been very, very surprised on how much we have been able to do, even though of the ongoing context that we're developing things. So I believe that the horizon for the work of emergency architecture and human rights is very broad. And we are always very happy to collaborate or to engage where our practices are needed as well.
Right, that's great to hear. So finally, Nicolás, what message would you, and on behalf of the team at EAHR also, like to share with the architecture and development community of today's times?
So we are strongly working and encouraging other organizations to focus on education, on the relation of the built environment and education. We believe that it's a key element in improving society in the long run. So for that, the material conditions need to be met. And that's where the architecture can play a fundamental role. There is a lot that architecture and architects can do. For example, just like examples, there can be the creation of open source models and designs. Of course, there's always pro bono work, or creating infrastructure which is socially and environmentally sustainable. Of course, that aesthetic value and the artistic value of architecture is also very, very important. Like art also gives us a reason to live as people, like gives meaning. But also we have to think about like the very pressing needs in urban systems as well. Like if we see that the city is suffering and there's people suffering from, for example, homelessness, we also have to think about creating sustainable housing for people. If we see that there is a huge problem with traffic, we have to think a way that creating like a more sustainable traffic system as well. So we have to strike the balance between valuable aesthetic contribution and a socially functional and also socially like desirable approach to architecture, urban planning, and urban studies in general. So I believe that it might be very hard to strike the balance, but in that sense, I also think that working in these multidisciplinary environments, bringing people from other areas, from other sectors, can yield more valuable results, and we can actually address issues from different sides that we might be blind if we are working. If I'm working just with human geographers, I might not focus that much on the built environment area as well. So I think it's fundamental to strike that balance and to work in that direction.
Okay. Thanks a lot once again, Nicolás, for joining us. And I would also personally be thrilled to see if there's an opportunity for EAHR to work in India. And yes. Congratulations on the work that you have been doing, and good luck for your future endeavors as well.
Thank you very much, Harun. Thank you very much for your time and for the invitation to do the interview. So
great. Bye then.